Hello there friends and welcome. Today's Elden Ring guide is all about how to achieve the maximum defense as possible regardless of light or heavy armor, even robes, as I'll provide you with multiple sources to ensure you'll have an easy time surviving even against the DLC bosses. Despite the release of the DLC, there's still this big misconception that you cannot simply tank in Elden Ring, and you're always doomed to die in 2 or 3 hits. That is not true at all. Usually players only care about vigor or hit points, which is the biggest mistake. Ideally your character wants to combine both nice hit points and amazing damage negation. That is how you can truly face tank bosses in the DLC, and through this guide I'll provide you with all the sources possible so you can stack as maximum defenses for even higher than 90% damage negation regardless of armor type. So without further ado, let us get into our ultimate tanking guide. First, with a quick showcase on the importance of damage negation. We have a character with the minimum defensive damage negation bonus as possible, just very light armor, not even that, robes, Alberic set here, which is a caster set, for a total of 28.7 physical damage negation, which is very low, especially for the DLC. Despite that, we do have very high hit points, close to 2400, way higher than the norm, and this is all at just 3 blessings, so still at the start of the DLC. Let's see how it goes. And well, as you can see, Relana has a very easy time at destroying us. As we just confirmed, high hit points alone is definitely not enough. Now let's try this with the same character, but maxed out damage negation. We have 71.5 against physical now, with the same hit points. And the difference is, of course, night and day. You can simply take on way more hits. More than twice the amount of before. Which of course provides you more windows to make mistakes and so on, and still survive, of course, and win against the boss. And when combined with some defensive Ashes of War, you would take even less damage despite just wearing robes. 84. Now let us do the same, but with heavy armor instead of robes. So now we have 80% physical damage negation instead of just 71. And well, it's even less damage. Just look at that, our hit points barely moved. That is how powerful stacking damage negation can be. You can just take on hits forever and ever, compared to light damage negation, of course. Now that we know just how powerful stacking high damage negation can be when combined with a nice amount of hit points, let's finally get into our damage negation sources. And I'll provide you with multiple ones, magic or not, so that you can fit them in any build. And well, there's 2 premises you need to properly understand. First, buffs in Elden Ring all have a different type, and buffs of the same type will not stack with themselves. For example, all the fortification buffs, magic, flame, lightning and so on, they are body buffs. The same for something like flame grant me strength, which is more offensive focused. You can only have 1 buff of the same type at the same type. So just 1 fortification, you cannot stack multiple ones. Second, buffs in Elden Ring do stack, but they do it in a multiplicative way. So it's not just adding the sum of buffs on top of each other. And there's also some diminishing returns as you really stack it to the max, but as I showed before, you can still have higher than even 80%. Now that we know that, let's finally get into our sources. First we have Golden Vow, one of the best ones. Golden Vow is an aura buff that provides you with, first, 10% extra damage negation against all types, which is amazing, including physical, magic and so on, and even an extra plus 50% bonus to damage, so it's amazing for both offenses and defenses. It is also quite long lasting at 80 seconds, longer than a minute, enough for most boss battles. And even hits an area of effect, so you can buff allies with it as well, or your summons. It does require 25 faith, but if you don't want to invest in faith at all, well, you do have an alternative. Golden Vow is unique in that it also has an Ash of War variant that can be found super early at Limgrave even, After casting it, you can even switch to another weapon and still retain the buff. The only downside is the effect is less powerful, so 11.5 extra damage percent and 7.5% for extra damage negation. At lower duration as well, 45 seconds only. Another very powerful source of an aura buff is the Commander's Standard weapon, which can also be found early. Its unique skill, Rallying Standard, has a close enough effect to Golden Vow, except it's way stronger. It will increase both your damage and damage negation by massive plus 20%. The only downside is the duration is rather low, at 30 seconds only, so that's even less than half the duration of Golden Vow for the spell variant. Equipping the Commander Standard does have a 40 dexterity requirement and 24 strength, but as far as strength, 16 is enough because you can simply two-hand the weapon at 16 strength and still cast the buff, of course. And yes, just like Golden Vow, you can equip something else afterwards and the buff will remain in effect. Just remember, because these are all aura buffs, they will not stack with each other, so you have to choose between the Golden Vow spell or Ash of War variant or the Commander Standard buff. Now that we know what the best aura buffs are, let us cover the body buffs for damage negation. Starting with the Fortification spells. They only require 10 faith, so pretty much any build can make use of them with low investment. And they will each increase your negation against an elemental or magical source of damage. The Fortification ones are the weakest, then you have the bigger upgrades such as Barrier of Gold for magic, or Golden Lightning Fortification for lightning. The Fortification spells will last 90 seconds and provide an extra plus 35% damage negation against the elemental type. Meanwhile, the bigger upgrades last 70 seconds and increase your negation by 60%. That alone is massive. The thing is, most enemies in Elden Ring are dangerous because of their physical damage. Physical is still the biggest damage component of them all. And for physical as a body buff, you have two main sources. The first is Black Flame's Protection. It requires 30 faith, which is high for a lot of builds, but provides the highest amount of physical damage negation of them all, which is 35% and lasts 70 seconds. There is a big downside, however. It will also reduce healing from all sources by 20%, no matter if it's flask, spells, even lifesteal. If you don't want to invest into faith at all, or don't want to incur in the healing penalty, you can simply eat the boiled crab consumables instead, which are easily acquired and farmable by just buying it from the Blackguard Bogart NPC, even early in the game by doing his quest. Boiled crab increases your physical damage negation by 20% and will last for 60 seconds. It's also somewhat easy to reapply during battle, for example at the start of boss's second phases. We also have another nice body buff from the perfume consumable Ironjar Aromatic. While it can increase your damage negation by a big amount, although Black Flame's Protection is still amazing, it has pretty crippling downsides. First, you can only move slowly, you cannot run under the effect. You can also only fat roll under it. And well, I just think it's far too slow. Even if it does increase your poise so that you can take hits and not get staggered as easily. Once again, because these are body buffs, they will stack with our aura buffs like Golden Vow we covered before. Lastly, we have to cover unique buffs. Called unique because they stack with everything else, including other unique buffs. First, and the most important of them all, is the Opaline Hardtear effect for your Wondrous Physic Mix Flask. This is a tremendous lifesaver. It increases all of your damage negation by a huge plus 50%, and also lasts for 3 whole minutes, enough for any boss battle in the game. The second flask effects aren't really necessary for tanking, you might as well spend them into something for extra damage, like the Cracked Shrouding Tears, for more damage of different elemental types. But there's always something to be said about the Winged Crystal Tear, because by just having this, even with starter endurance, your character will be able to equip a full set of the heaviest armors in the game, which of course also provide more damage negation. But once again, in the beginning of this guide I already showed you a way of having higher than 70% while just wearing robes. Now let's cover unique sources for Ashes of War, starting with one of the best of them all, Endure. You can find this super early from Night Bernal, even at the beginning of the game, at the War Master Shack, and the effect is extremely powerful. Can be used on any weapons and will essentially for 3 seconds increase all of your damage negation, physical and magical, by 45%. I can't think of anything that's as big in the game. Second, for the same duration, it will also provide you with such a tremendous boost to your poise that your character will achieve close enough to full stagger invulnerability, which means of course you cannot be staggered out of your attacking or spellcasting animations against most enemy attacks outside of grabs and some very few specific attacks. While the duration itself might seem low, remember that this is cast very fast, has little FP cost, and ideally you just wanna chain it together with fast attacks, even heavy attacks can work, or fast spells. So by just properly combining your Endure with your attacks and spells, for example you cast Endure, attack a few times, Endure again and repeat, your character can easily face tank even the last boss of the DLC. When of course combined with the other buffs I've just mentioned, this is how you get even higher than 90% physical damage negation buff, which makes the game a breeze. Don't forget you can and should also use this for healing, because of the fact you'll take reduced damage and won't be staggered, so it's great for restoring your hit points or FP. The second Ash of War for damage negation has a powerful effect, but is rather limited in its use, Holy Ground. First, it can only be applied on shields, and will create a powerful defensive boosting area of effect on the spot you cast it. That provides 20% extra damage negation against all types and even around 17 regeneration per second. However, the buff itself will still persist after you leave the zone for a few seconds. But because the enemies can just constantly move away from you, I don't find it as efficient as something like Endure. Now let us cover the best Talisman sources for ultra damage negation stacking, starting with the best of them all, the Dragoncrest Greatshield Talisman. It has the amazing effect of boosting your physical damage negation by 20 whole points. So even if you were fully naked, with just this talisman, you would still reduce physical damage by 1/5. But of course it's better when stacked with other sources. You also have lower variants of this talisman, the Dragoncrest Shield ones, that you can find earlier in the game because the Greatshield talisman is somewhat late, but for the DLC you'll always have it. Honestly, it's so good that once you find it, you should never remove it, never again. Just keep it on all times. Besides that, for the other sources of damage, magical and elemental, you do have a different talisman, and they did receive upgrades in the DLC. You now have +3 versions of these talismans like Spelldrake against magic, Bolt Drake against lightning, and so on. These can of course be combined with the Dragoncrest Greatshield, so you have the best damage negation against physical, and whatever extra damage type your boss is using. But honestly, for the final boss at least, both the main game and the DLC final bosses, the best one is the Holy Damage Negation Boosting Talisman. Against most other enemies, however, because physical is the most dangerous source, the Dragoncrest Greatshield is enough. And you can make do with some body buffs we just mentioned. For elemental and magical damage, you might as well spend the extra talisman slot in something that provides more attack power if you prefer. The Ritual Shield Talisman can also work, but it's rather limited in use. While it does raise all of your damage negation by enormous amounts, it is only while you are at full hit points, so only works once pretty much. Last but not least, while it's not tied to damage negation, I still think it's important to explain how to properly increase your hit points, because when you combine both, is when you can truly face tank enemies in the DLC. For starters, 60 Vigor is essential. It will provide you with a decent enough amount of hit points, 1900, and any build can get away with this at around level 150. However, there are still other ways of increasing your hit points to the max, starting with my favorite of them all, Morgoth's Great Rune. This will increase your hit points by an extra 25%, which trust me matters a lot. Instead of 1900, you'll now have close to 2400 hit points, which of course matters when you're stacking damage negation to the max. The only downside is that as a Great Rune, it will of course go away upon death and you have to use a Rune Arc to get the benefit again. But when you're stacking or tanking potential to the max, your chances of dying are also way lower. Besides that, the DLC also added a new ultimate version of the best talisman for extra hit points, the Crimson Ember Medallion, now with its +3 version. When combined with Morgoth's Great Rune and 60 Vigor, you can have even up to 2612 hit points. And I suppose if you really wanted to main max HP, you can also go with Erdtree's Favor +2. They all stack for 2700 HP. Now let's just do a quick section on how to properly combine everything we learned, so how to stack all of these most important buffs for maximum defenses. Especially for prebuffing purposes before boss battles, so you stack your defenses to the max. First, of course, you want the Greatshield Talisman equipped, always. That's already a huge increase. You might also consider a second damage negation boosting talisman. For example, SPELLBLADE against MAGE is great for Relana, it depends on the boss you're fighting. And this is just with light armor. Robes, actually. First, drink your flask of Wondrous Physics so the Opaline Hardtear effect will kick in. That's 50% already. Now go for Golden Vow or any of its variants, 56%. You might as well go for a regeneration buff if you have the faith to spare. Bestial Vitality, for example, is only 12 faith. But anyways, after that, go for a damage negation body buff, such as Black Flame's Protection, 71% already. Or of course, the Boiled Crab, which would leave you at 65%. Don't forget, you still have effects like Endure, which can increase it to even 80%, just with robes. If you had full heavy armor, it would be 76%. Or even 80% with Black Flame's Protection. Or 90% with Endure. Meanwhile, the same character, but at max blessing, instead of just 3, would have 82, close to 83% against physical, with just robes. Or 90.5% with Endure. Meanwhile, for full heavy armor, it's 88% against physical. Or 93.5% against physical with Endure. It doesn't get any higher than that, I'm afraid. Tell me it's not enough. Well, alright friends, so this was it for our ultimate tanking and face tanking guide for Elden Ring Shadow of the Erd 3. If you found this guide useful, as always, please remember to like, subscribe, and also consider becoming a channel member if you can. Thank you for watching and see you next time, friends.